Okay, Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bismillah, salam ala rasulillah. Today I will present chapter 6, language and social interaction. Can you see my presentation? Shall I start?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay. Before we start, here I put the glossary of this chapter. We can see in the slide the sociolinguistic terms and their definitions, which we will go through in our discussion, inshallah. In fact, language and social interaction can be looked at under the following headings. Number one, rapid form of language switching, problems of language choice in multilingual societies, structure of conversations, sequences of utterances in conversations, and rules about the interpretation of conversational discourse, which suggested by Labov, differences of the rules about conversations between cultures, and these differences within the same society. I thought it would be useful to divide the discussion in this order in order to organize the concepts and the ideas of this chapter. In the previous chapter, we discussed a relationship between language and social context, and we saw that in style shifting, dialect switching, diglossia, and language switching, there is a relationship between social situation and language variety. And here in this chapter, inshallah, we will see that these kinds of shifting and switching are not determined by social situation only. As we can see here, the social psychologist of language, Howard Giles, has pointed out speakers are not socio-linguistic automata. That means speakers do not just respond automatically to situations, but as it states here, speakers can use switching for their own purposes to manipulate or to influence or to define the situations as they wish, and to convey meaning or specific meanings and personal intention. Okay. In situations involving more than one language, this can be done in one of two ways. Number one, using two languages at once, or as the author call this kind of language switching, rapid form of code switching. In fact, this switching, as the British sociolinguist Lee Page has pointed out, has the effect of enabling a speaker to signal two identities at once. For example, Chinese students at the University of Hong Kong. Chinese students at the University of Hong Kong often speak a mixture of English and Cantonese, because if they spoke only English, they might be regarded as being disloyal to their Chinese community. And on the other hand, if they speak only Cantonese, they might be regarded as uneducated within the context of an English language university. So speaking both languages together overcomes both these problems. And perhaps this answers Nadia's question about using two identities at once. Okay. The second possibility is to use language switching, which means a speaker can switch completely from one language to another. And the linguist David Barkin has described an interesting example of this of language switching from Uganda. Here we can see a map of some languages of spoken in Uganda. In fact, in Kampala, the capital city of Uganda, the socio-linguistic situation is very complex. There are many different ethnic groups living in the town, most of them speaking different languages, and some of the group are from Uganda, and others come from Kenya, Sudan, and Congo. In the two housing states which Parkin studied, many different dialects or languages are spoken. So the situation is very complex, and accordingly, many people in Kampala are often presented with interesting problems of language choice. Social situation is naturally a determining factor. For example, tenant association meetings. David Barkin has observed that tenant association meetings are conducted in English and Luganda in the more prestigious of the two housing states, and in English and Swahili in the other states. Then we have language choice can be employed to indicate particular moods and intentions, and that's exactly as we have seen in the example of Chinese students, because they intend to show two identities at once. But the situation in Uganda, of course, is more complex because there are more variety of languages, and speakers have to choose between them. The selection of a language may depend on the topic of discussion, and the author gives us an example. A young man, an immigrant from Kenya, who was a native speaker of a Bantu language, was observed one evening to meet another Kenyan man. The second Kenyan was a speaker of an unrelated Noetic language, so they could not communicate in their original dialects. However, when they were discussing problems which affected them both, the language they actually used was Swahili, because they see Swahili is a language that indicates their equality and friendly relationship. But on the other hand, of the topic of their discussion is something involving competition, like posting about money. They would use English to communicate to each other because they consider English as a perfect verbal communication means. The study of the way in which language is used in conversations is an important part of sociolinguistics, as we have seen in the previous examples. Sociolinguists, in fact...
Afnan, can you hear me?
Yes.
Afnan, can we hold for a second now, because you have been really dealing with very interesting issues related to language and social interaction, where you talked about code switching and different situations. Okay. You gave examples, you related that to identity, to the situation, and probably to linguistic influence. Looking at the table of content of our book, a textbook that we use, you see that we started with language and society in general. Then we moved into language and social class. We also discussed language and ethnic groups. Then we looked at language and sex. In chapter 5, which was last chapter we discussed last time, we talked about language and context. Then we talk about, you see, we started very general in the beginning, then we went very specific, dealing with specific issues related to language in terms of the social aspects. Then we went into this part today, which focuses on social interaction. the question that we might raise, what do we mean by social interaction? Fran, can you help us with this?
Yes, of course. Social interaction, communicating between people to establish relationships or to maintain that relationship.
That's true. So it is the use of language. It is the use of language within a social context where there is exchange of information regarding different matters. You give an example, for example, meetings. Okay, how social interaction, how language is used in meetings. This is social interaction. How you give a speech. This is social interaction. How people react to it. So we talk about how language is involved within the society. Okay, I mean rules of interaction. What is involved within the interaction. You get examples of that like code switching and other things, okay? And this indicates the complexity of language, where we cannot really look at language and geography. For example, from sociolinguistics, yes, we could look at dialects in a general sense, but within these dialects, I see your contributions, Jazakumullah khair, on the dashboard, and your colleagues could see them. I think you can see the chat board, can you? طبعا بتشوفها عندي لكن I make sure that the others can. Okay. So there are many issues, which is the situation, no matter what that situation is, whether it's social, like we talked about social classes or whatever, and whether it is ethnicity, okay, ethnic background that people belong to, whether it's something that we'll talk about when we talk about language and discourse. Topics that we discuss, the topic itself plays a great role in how interaction or language difference that might really, let's call it linguistic variations, take place. And something that I didn't see mentioned a lot, probably when we talk about language and nation, which is the influence of the language itself. When Afnan talked about Swahili and English interchangeably used in Kampala, in Uganda, for many different reasons, okay? English has an influence, has a background, has a history, has a culture. Also, Swahili has its own background, its culture, and you see, people relate to these languages differently. This is reflected in their own social interaction that takes place. طبعا Jabari talked here about English and Arabic. I think this is the topic he's dealing with. I don't know. Somebody selected this topic. How we shift from Arabic into English in our conversations. Okay. You cannot switch unless you are bilingual. Okay, or semi-bilingual. So it even goes within the dialects, as we'll see in diglossia, for example. Okay, if we take diglossia in its own term. Even in a situation where they don't consider it to be diaglossic, this shifts even within the dialects, within the style itself. We talked about idiolect, I mean the dialect for a certain person that indicates her or his identity. But in reality, we don't have what we call it static idiolect, but we have a dynamic idiolect that is really shaped based on our beliefs, and our identities, in the situation that we deal with, in the topic that we talk with, in the situation in which we are interacting. But this is just to tell you how really sophisticated, how many factors are involved in our communication process, and therefore that would affect the code switching that we make at any certain point. Let's go back to you, Afnan.
So the study of the way in which language is used in conversations is an important part of sociolinguistics. As we have seen in the previous examples, sociolinguists have looked at the way in which language can be used for manipulating relationships and achieving particular goals. They also have looked at the rules for conducting and interpretation of conversation, and at the way these may differ from society to society. Actually, they do so because they consider language as an important means of establishing and maintaining relationships with other people, not only as a means of communicating information. Here we have an interesting statement. Young children have to learn not only the pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary of their language, they also have to learn how to use language and conversational interaction. Here I want to ask my colleagues, do you agree with this statement and not, and why?
Okay, regarding this point, we all know that not just young children, but also adults need to know how to use language in communication, and that is the meaning of communicative competence, which is how to employ language and to principles of language in conveying messages. But I think for my point of view here is because of your children acquiring language in a more natural way, by listening to others or by language acquisition in children come unconsciously. So in most time or in most thing or related to this issue is children know how to use language in unconscious way, and sometimes we have to tell them how to use them, but this is my point of view because we are not dealing with the cognitive skills of them, and I hope you understand my point.
Okay, Amani, thank you. Yeah, that's very clear to me at least. We'll see other colleagues if they have something to say. Jabir, you want to say something, Jabir? We'll give you the mic, Jabir. Jabir says no. Okay. Abdullah, yeah, go ahead. Okay. Anyway, what Amani referred to, she's differentiating two things. Yes, you know, knowing the ethnography speech, the ability to interact positively or appropriately within a conversation, within the communication process, requires more than the language itself, that we know the rules of conversation that takes place. And this is, most of the time, is cultural specific. Cultural specific. And we realize this even as people from an Arabic background. Even the Arabs, they cannot really talk about that as homogeneous. No, this is heterogeneous, but in general, we have our own conversational rules that we abide by and that we adhere to when we communicate. That differs. That differ from that of when you go into English context. Okay? With children, and sometimes we've got to be very consciously aware regarding what is proper, what is improper. And this is related to what Amani mentioned regarding, here we talk about the communicative competence rather than the linguistic competence, where we talk about socio-linguistic component of the competence, okay? Where we observe rules of conversation within a language. We acquire the knowledge that how we communicate properly in a language. Our grammar might be perfect, pronunciation is good, things like that. But when it comes to understanding how to communicate appropriately in different communication situations, that requires some, I agree with you, conscious knowledge. As for children, even if we teach them, they pick it up, as Mamani mentioned, which is true. They don't really acquire the language in terms of sound system, the words, the grammar, etc. But how to participate. And this is, we've got to really realize that our children, to a certain extent, is a reflection of who we are in terms of how we, especially when they mature. Yes, they differ in different ages. They have their own ego, they have their own personalities, but they unconsciously acquire what's going on around them from the society. And this is what we realize, that when our children go to school, they acquire certain interactional, social interaction patterns that we don't observe at home, for example, either positive or negative. I'm not really talking about the negative side. That really tells you how sensitive children are to these unobserved, sometimes, social interaction practices. I hope I was able to comment to what Ramani and Afnan have already contributed. Anybody else? طبعا نادية is talking, she's an experienced teacher. This is why I'm talking about how to become a good listener. And this is very important in interaction. Inshallah, Afnan will talk about that.
Okay, I'd like to thank you and my colleagues for the
interesting practice that takes place within that community. You may go ahead.
Is my voice clear? And yes, it's important for the children.
Yes, everything is clear. If it's not clear, we'll shout at you.
How to use language and conversational interaction in order to be able to establish social relationships and participate in two-way communication. Here we will discuss the aspects of the structure of conversations. One thing that the children have to learn is the way in which conversations are structured. We have rules about structure of conversations. The first rule says that an obvious aspect of the structure of conversation is that they are based on the principle of turn taking. That means only one speaker should speak at a time. And we have to note that a speaker's turn gives not only the right but also the obligation to speak. For example, if someone were reporting a conversation between Nadia and Maram, for example, they might say one point, and then Maram didn't say anything, in spite of the fact that at that moment neither Nadia nor Maram said anything. The point is that it was Maram's turn, and that is why she is the one who is deemed to have remained silent. Is the example clear? Okay, the second rule is there are points where it's possible and points where it's not possible to interrupt a speaker. And the third rule said there are also rules about how and when one is allowed to introduce a topic. There are even rules about silence. For example, in a conversation between two English speakers who are not close friends, so one thing that the children have to learn is the way in which conversations are structured. As the conversation is not randomly structured, there are rules about the structure of conversations. Here we can find rules. Number one, an obvious aspect of the structure of conversations is that they are based on the principle of turn taking, which means that one speaker should speak at a time. And we have to notice that a speaker's turn gives not only the right, but only the obligation to speak. For example, if someone were reporting a conversation between Nadia and Maram, for example, they might say of one point, and then Maram did not say anything, in spite of the fact that at that moment, neither Nadia nor Maram said anything. But the point is that it was Maram's turn, and that is why she is the one who is deemed to have remained silent. Okay? The second rule is says that there are points where it's possible and points where it's not possible for to interrupt a speaker. Also, there are rules about how and when one is allowed to introduce a new topic. There are even rules about silence. For example, in a conversation between two English speakers who are not close friends, a silence of longer than about 4 seconds is not allowed, which means that people become embarrassed if nothing is said after that time, and they feel obligated to say anything. And in fact, many of these rules can be broken, but people usually acknowledge that they have broken these rules. For example, one may say, "I'm sorry to interrupt you." That means he is aware of breaking that rule of conversation. We can also observe that conversations consist of structured sequences of different types of utterances, and a random sequence of utterances does not constitute a conversation. For example, in most cases, conversations are organized so that questions are followed by answers. As the example given here, question number 1, have you written to Ali yet? Answer number 1, no, not yet. Then the second question, are you going to write? Then the second answer, yes, eventually. But it's possible for question and answer sequences to be embedded in one another, as the conversation appear on the right here. Question number 1, have you seen Ali yet? Then a second question, is he back? Then a third question, didn't you know? After that, answer number 3, no, I didn't. Answer number 2, he's back, all right. Answer number 1, well, I haven't seen him. So questions and answers are embedded here, not following each other in this conversation, and that's acceptable, as we know. Summoners are normally followed by answers, as in the example. Ahmed synonym number 1, Ali, then the answer number 1, coming. But they do not undergo embedding like question and answer. For example, Ali, then Ahmed, yes, coming. This is not a possible adult conversation because they cannot undergo embedding like questions and answers. The boss has pointed out that there are a number of rules for interpretation of conversational discourse that adults have mastered and that children do not always understand. If a speaker A makes a request for information and speaker B's response is not related linguistically to the question, then the response must be interpreted as asserting that there exists a proposition known to both A and B, which does make a connection, and from which an answer to A's question can be inferred. Here we have an example. If A asks, are you going on holiday this year? Then B answers, I haven't got any money. Here, speaker B response is not related linguistically to the question. For example, he didn't say, no, I'm not going on holiday this year. And the answer to A's question can be inferred. The relevant proposition in this example is, holidays cost money. Okay. In fact, the rules for interpretation of discourse exist. Can easily be demonstrated by showing what happens when they are broken. For example, the American linguist Walt Wolfram investigated people's reactions to questioning of the following sort. How old are you? 33. How come? In fact, there is a rule of discourse interpretation which says that a how come question involves an assertion that there exists a non-obvious proposition which is known to B but which is not known to A. So Wolfram inferred with the operation of this rule through asserting. He asserts that it was not obvious why B was 33. The reaction to this how come question shows very clearly that something had gone wrong. Some people laughed, some were embarrassed, and some make a joke of it. So all of the reactions show that there is something wrong, which means there is a rule has been broken. Okay. Younger children may have trouble with interpreting conversations. Wolfram demonstrated that adults are very well aware of the fact that children may have difficulties of this sort by getting his 6-year-old son taught to carry out the same how come question. In this case, relaxed and unpursed exchange occurred, like the following example. How old are you? 33. How come? Because I was born in 1940. This kind of example of conversation is expected because, as he suggests, the adult is very well aware of the fact that the children may have difficulties of this sort. Okay. All societies have rules about the way in which language should be used in social interaction. It is interesting to observe that these rules may vary widely between one society to another. The study of these rules and the cross-cultural differences in communicative norms is often known as ethnography of speaking. Here we have an example. It's normal among us English speakers for the answerer to speak first in telephone conversation, while some people in Japan expected the caller to be the one to speak first. Okay. Here we have an example of another cultural differences between societies. In fact, the difference of the rules about conversations between cultures can often be led in cross-cultural communication to misunderstanding and even hostility. In Western Canada, communication difficulties arise in interaction between English-speaking people of European origin and people who are speakers of a group of North American Indian language known as Athabascan.
Yes, go ahead.
In this map, we can see the distribution of Athabascan language in Western Canada. They also found in Alaska. Okay. Athabascan. Okay, thank you.
Athabascan.
The major difference between the two ethnic groups is that the ones use language to establish social relations. They speak to people in order to get to know them. Okay. Among Athabascan groups, on the other hand,
that's fine.
this
is
avoided if there is doubts about social relationships and about how one should behave. So in inter-ethnic communication there, English speakers start a conversation because they want to set about establishing social relations, and because the Athabascans have remained silent. So the English speakers are the ones who introduced the topic of the conversation. And when there is a silence, they become uncomfortable about the silence and talk again. The result is a conversation where English speakers hold the floor for the most of the time, and on the other hand, the Athabascans go away from the conversation, thinking that English speakers are rude and self-centered. On the other hand, the English speakers find the Athabascans rude people and uncommunicative. The major problem here is that both groups did not realize that different groups of people have different norms concerning what and how, when and how language is to be used. Okay. Misunderstanding in communication can even happen within the same society. For example, the American sociolinguist Deborah Stinan has suggested that in many respects, communication between men and women can be regarded as cross-cultural communication. She also has suggested that men and women often fail to understand one another. And in fact, some Americans who have read her book on this subject have written to her to say that sociolinguistics has saved their marriages. One aspect of communication that may cause problems of this type is the relationship between directness and indirectness, because different people within the same society may use different degree of directness and indirectness. For example, within Europe, the degree of use of indirectness may vary considerably from one culture to another. Northern Europeans living in rural Greece eventually learn to say not. Who's that person standing over there? But I have never seen the person who is standing over there before. Which is very indirectness statement. It's possible that indirectness is used more in societies which are or which have been until recently heavily hierarchical in structure, because you want to avoid giving insult to people in authority over you, and also you want to avoid degrees people lower in the social hierarchy than you. So indirectness is an important strategy in such societies. It's possible too that the more frequent use by women in Western societies of indirectness in conversation is due to the fact that women have traditionally had less power in these societies. Actually, men use indirectness less often than women do, and therefore run the risk of being perceived by women as being tactless, dominating, and impolite. Because they use indirectness less, they are also not sufficiently sensitive to its use by women, and may will not realize when women have indirectly made a request or given an opinion. Women may therefore interpret men as being insensitive. On the other hand, women, because of their relative lack of directness, may be perceived by men as being evasive because they are not sufficiently direct in what they say. So directness and indirectness are important aspects that people should pay attention to in their communication to avoid misunderstanding even within the same society. That was was the end of my presentation. This was my presentation and discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Afnan. MashaAllah, very interesting discussion about a very vague topic. Something, if you allow me, Afnan, they talked about in the chapter, but in brief, regarding the role of nonverbal communication in social interaction. And here there is a point of even cross-cultural communication, sometimes problems in cross-cultural communication because of nonverbal communication, where their meanings vary from one society to another. Because these issues that we talk about, norms of ethnography, speech, of communication, including nonverbal communication, raise a lot of breakdown in communication because people tend to communicate non-verbally differently. Not all the time, but there's some non-verbal communication that is cultural specific. Gestures, body movement, distance, contact, varies from one society into another. How to greet people, like in our society, it's not really accepted for men and women to shake hands with each other, okay? For people who are not really close relatives based on certain Islamic teaching, it's not only a taboo. Taboo is something else, okay? But these are basic rules, norms of communication, okay? While in Hispanic society, a woman that you meet for the first time, or a man, she would hug him and he would hug her. This is a way of communication. It doesn't mean that they have any relationship with each other. It's a matter of greeting, okay? The French, they kiss each other on the cheeks, you see? So it varies from one society to another based on the values, the beliefs, the norms. And this is why this is one of the problems that we face with non-Muslims or people in different societies when you shake hands with women or women shake hands with men, okay? For example, this is something, you start a conversation with somebody, you start some form of relationship with a doctor, with a teacher, with a neighbor, or whatever. And that has to be clarified. These are some of the issues that really people need to observe and take into consideration, okay?